Lots of commentary about Israeli aggression and gruesome pictures that focus on Lebanese casualties and bombings. Not nearly as much reporting about the death and destruction taking place in Israel. Just today, the Lebanese prime minister corrected earlier media reports that 40 civilians were killed in a fresh airstrike when, in fact, there was only one casualty. With us now is Cliff Kincaid with Accuracy in Media. Cliff, what's going on there?
It's worse than bias, Neil. What we're dealing with now in this age is global terrorism and global propaganda. It's interesting to note that Hezbollah had its own TV and radio stations. That's why Israel went in and bombed them. The problem is that Hezbollah then depends on Al-Jazeera, which has functioned as a terrorist front for all kinds of terrorist groups, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda. They are dominating the global media debate to the extent that, and this shows their evil genius, Hamas and Hezbollah, which started this whole thing to begin with, now are being seen not only in the Arab world, but here as the victims.
So, Cliff, what are they showing versus what they're not showing? So they're showing a lot of Lebanese casualties and the brutality of these attacks, but when it comes to Israel getting attacks either from Katyusha rockets or the like, none of that. Explain.
Well, look, I mean, with all due respect, look at the images that have been on your show today. Earlier, you had Jonathan Hunt in Lebanon showing the destruction, the carnage, the smoke billowing up over Beirut, talk about bodies at a hospital, dead civilians, and what do you have in terms of the Israeli point of view, shooting down a drone? Now, who wins in that kind of propaganda comparison?
It's a good point. Let me ask you, though, in the Arab world, we only are getting, you'll get a report on Israeli casualties, right? A dozen yesterday. You'll get that report. You just won't see the carnage it caused, right?
Well, that's right. But there's another problem here. Israel has been behind the eight ball, just as we have been behind the eight ball in Iraq. Now, it's interesting to note, in addition to bombing the Hezbollah radio and TV facilities, Israel arrested early on some Al Jazeera employees who had been allowed to open a bureau in Jerusalem. They were arrested, put in jail, detained on suspicion of aiding Hezbollah. Israel has got to deal with this problem other than just putting an ambassador on a TV show.
But let me ask you about that, Cliff. Now, you're talking about what's fair use of video and all that. I'm told that when a strike happens in Israel, they do not allow cameramen to show the carnage out of respect for those who've just died. It's a different case in Lebanon. Does that strategy or policy hurt Israel more than it does those who sympathize with Hezbollah?
But of course, yes. But of course, the reason is that Israel doesn't want film footage of where the missiles are hitting.
Exactly, right.
So that the terrorists can then adjust their aim and sight.
So what would you change on Israel's part?
Well, it's hard to do anything at this point. But I'll tell you one thing we've got to do, that is all the free nations of the world, is stop this global terrorist propaganda network from growing. What we're doing at AIM is trying to stop the entry of Al Jazeera International into the U.S. and other Western media markets. This is going to be the English language spin-off of the old Al Jazeera. And by the way, one of their correspondents, formerly picked up in Afghanistan, is now in prison in Spain on charges of being an agent of Al-Qaeda. Another Al Jazeera employee at the prison in Guantanamo Bay. Their first managing director exposed as an agent of Saddam Hussein. When are we going to learn our lesson? And yet Al Jazeera here in the United States, Neil, in the United States, is given press credentials to cover the White House
Cliff.
and the Congress.
Oh, you're right. Cliff Kincaid in Washington, thank you. We'll have more right after this.